From Microbe TV, this is TWiP, This Week in Parasitism, episode 253, recorded on February 7th, 2025. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast all about parasites. Joining me today from New York, Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everyone.
Now, Daniel, there's nothing on your bow tie.
Actually, if you look close, so this was a challenge. So I don't know if our people are aware, but this is the day we're recording. This is Women's Heart Health Day. But it's also a Friday, so it's also Sexually Transmitted Infection Day. So I wore my red STI bow tie, and if one looks close, they can see the clap.
There are hands clapping?
Hands clapping. Yeah.
I can't see that. Okay,
So
I'll take your word for it.
Gonorrhea. It's gonorrhea. And it's named, right? The treatment was you would take a Bible and then clap it closed on the affected.
Oh, my gosh.
And apparently then you would never return to that provider, so they would assume that you were cured.
Yeah. Also joining us from Glasgow, Scotland, Christina Nowla.
Good evening, everybody.
How's it over there? Is it cold?
It's quite cold, yeah. It is not freezing, but cold, miserable. But you know what? Every day there's about 2.5 minutes more daylight, so
yeah, it's getting
there's something
longer
to celebrate. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty soon it'll be warm. Okay.
Oh, not here.
If you enjoy these programs, these science programs, we'd love to have your support. Microbe.tv/contribute. Okay, Daniel, remind us what's the case all about.
Sure. So it sounds like we had a lot of interested folks this week, but to remind everyone tuning back in, those tuning in for the first time, this was a 28-year-old who ended up coming into this hospital in Arusha, Tanzania. And this 28-year-old had been out and about, a returning traveler from visiting game parks. He is a local Tanzanian. And after this family trip, he developed fevers, just felt really crummy, so malaise, bad headaches, everything hurt, just felt kind of somnolent. It was really like his wake sleep cycles were thrown. Did the initial workup, blood smears were negative. They were not able to detect malaria. But he just was not getting any better, was progressing. So they decided to repeat those blood smears. And they actually saw something not in the red cells, but something extra-erythrocytic. And this went ahead and gave them the diagnosis. We learned a little bit more, HIV negative, no toxic habits, no other sort of past medical history. And the symptom onset had been about a week, and it actually was probably a week or two after getting back from the game parks. Rest of the family was completely okay. This individual was actually referred to another facility where they were treated.
Okay. Christina, take that first one, please.
Galen writes, hello all. Patient likely suffering from sleeping sickness caused by Trypanosoma brucei rhodesiense. At elevation, he lived carefree from the tsetse flies, but while on safari, likely suffered a bite. Unfortunately, from his symptoms, it seems he may already have CNS involvement and may require toxic millarsoprol for treatment. After many years of listening, I finally got around to donating and plan to continue donating going forward. Thank you for all your various productions. I've learned a lot and passed along the knowledge when giving lunch talks in residency and plugged your podcasts frequently. Take care.
Daniel.
Rafid writes, so we have a lot of emails and some of them are long, so I might truncate a little. I just apologize to our emailers, but I guess we'll keep the full emails in our show notes. But Rafid writes, hello, TWiP team. I have just returned from Glasgow, and I happen to say that my daughter will be doing her master's degree at the University of Glasgow.
Yay!
My guest for this week will be East African trypanosomiasis with the species Brucei rhodiense. I base this on the trip to the game park, the painful bug bite, and the intensity of the symptoms. May I suggest the book King Leopold's Ghost, which explores the colonial exploitation of Congo, which led to the forced migration of people into tsetse fly-infected jungles to harvest rubber trees, which led to major outbreaks of sleeping sickness. And then we get a quick anecdote. All right, the province of Quebec, where I live, has French as its official language and has a policy of encouraging immigration from French-speaking countries, including French-speaking parts of Africa. As a result, we have many African immigrants. A few years ago, our regional hospital in Gatineau admitted an African man fleeing conflict with a case of severe refractory depression thought to be secondary to events he lived through. The patient was interviewed, videotaped, no medication intervention, transferred to the psychiatric hospital, where the doctor repeatedly asked the patient, "Sir, do you know why you are admitted here?" And the sleepy patient would open his eyes and say, "Yes, I am here so that you can cure me of my sleeping sickness." I think I actually am familiar with this case, right?
Me too, yes, yeah.
All right. And this is a returning, I think this is a returning.
Yeah, Michael Libman, who was on TWiP.
Exactly.
Told us that, yeah. All right, Paul writes, returning book winner, diagnosis, East African sleeping sickness caused by T. brucei rhodesiense. Supporting clues, history of visiting game parks where the parasite is carried by wild mammals, painful insect bite. Altitude may be a reference to decreased malaria transmission at higher altitudes. The geographic clues support East Africa sleeping sickness. Symptoms, while very nonspecific, the symptoms are consistent with sleeping sickness. Timing is consistent as disease caused by TB rhodesiense has a shorter incubation period, 1 to 3 weeks, in contrast to TBG, which is much longer. Diagnosis, lack of findings on the initial blood smear, leading to repeat smears, is characteristic. The finding of an extracellular organism on the smear is a critical diagnostic finding. East Africa sleeping sickness is very uncommon. The vast majority of sleeping sickness is West, caused by TBG. Treatment should be started promptly as this disease progresses over a few weeks. Christina.
Matt writes, hello. In hearing the clinical presentation and history, we immediately thought of trypanosoma, which is in line with the extra-erythrocytic parasite on blood smear. Based on the geographic location and the time of onset of symptoms, we favor trypanosoma brucei rhodesiense. A quick Google search reveals CDC travel advisories and a few papers regarding trypanosoma cases in people visiting Tanzanian game parks. My wife, an infectious disease doctor, and I, a veterinary pathologist, enjoy your podcast and discussing the overlap in our cases. Thanks.
Daniel.
Steve writes, hello, prestigious purveyors of parasitic plots. The 26-year-old visiting game parks in Tanzania most likely has African trypanosomiasis caused by T. brucei and spread to humans via the bite of the tsetse fly. The diagnostic extra-erythrocytic form seen on the blood smear would be the trypomastogote stage of the parasite, which are quite visible on a Giemsa stain. Goes into the 2 different subspecies. And the CDC claims that there's no range overlap. However, he quotes a paper from Emerging Infectious Diseases. And actually, I will say Uganda is where there is a little bit of this overlap. And then he goes on, notes that despite a historic incidence of nearly exclusive Eastern African trypanosomiasis, there have been cases with Gambiense from game parks in Tanzania. When evaluating the patient, a differential diagnosis would include malaria, arbovirus infections, and bacterial infections, including, though not excepting, rickettsia, Bartonella, and Borrelia. A CBC with differential would have been collected to guide diagnostic direction. Well, I managed 2 case submissions in a row. Maybe I'll take it to 3. I have not received a book yet. Thanks for all the hard work. Steve in the Eastern Sierra.
Eugene writes, Dear TWiP, my wife and I discovered TWiP a year ago and look forward to every new episode. This case brought back a memory from a social studies class in high school 35 years ago describing sleeping sickness in Africa and the tsetse fly that spreads it. My wife teaches high school social studies and is disappointed that I don't remember much of that curriculum that doesn't have an exotic-sounding insect name associated with it. Thank you very much for the inspirational science communication you do. Eugene is in San Jose. Christina.
Lauren writes, Dear esteemed parasitological gurus, my thoughts for the case of the young man recently returned from vacationing in East African Wildlife Park is Trypanosoma brucei rhodesiense, aka East African sleeping sickness. It causes fast onset acute trypanosomiasis in humans, unlike the West African Trypanosoma brucei gambiense, a highly zoonotic parasite that is prevalent in southern and eastern Africa, where game animals and livestock are thought to be the primary reservoir. And I think I'll skip to the end. Thanks for another interesting case. I keep learning. I love having to get out my maps and think about the larger landscape to think about what makes sense. Lauren, returning champion, so I already got to read about this in my excellent book.
Daniel.
All right, Michelle and Alexander from the First Vienna Parasitology Passion Club write, Dear TWiP panosomes, we believe that the 28-year-old patient is suffering from the African sleeping sickness, medically known as African trypanosomiasis. There is a small number of parasitic diseases which produce extra-erythrocytic forms that can be seen in the blood smear, and African trypanosomiasis is a prominent example which fits the symptoms described in this case. Now, filarial infections may also be detected on blood smear, although patients suffering from filariasis are not generally as systemically ill. Finally, the gametocytes of Plasmodium can also sometimes be seen on a blood smear, though malaria has been excluded. African trypanosomiasis caused by Trypanosoma brucei, most likely T. brucei rhodiense, judging by the geography, transmitted by the tsetse fly, associated with severe disease, higher mortality. 2 recent clinical cases came to mind, which we would like to share with you. First was the diagnosis of X-flagellated male gametocytes of P. vivax via blood smear in a young woman, returned to Austria from a work trip to Ethiopia. And looks like we have a second case, not a parasitic one. So we're just not that interested. Sorry, guys. Thanks for the great case. All the best, Michelle and Alexander.
Felix writes, Dear hosts, this was a fun one, especially since I spent part of my intern year in Moshi, a small town close to Arusha. I have some firsthand experience fighting tsetse flies that always somehow find their way inside a Jeep. My guess for this case is sleeping sickness caused by T. brucei, probably rhodensiense. Maybe the hero of this episode should be David Bruce, as he discovered not 1, but 2 zoonoses.
But we've done him already. I suppose we can heat him up again one time. Kimona writes, Dear TWiP team, let it be known that Kimona has received no such signed copy of PD7 despite nearly 3 years of trying. But fear ye not, she owns both a 2nd edition and a 7th edition. Dixon's drumroll now elicits a somber sense of doom. It seems that simple probability and chance should have allotted me one. And then Vincent removes my name from the drawing. Guys, it's not the book, it's the autograph I need. I am counting on its valued appreciation when most of our northern hemisphere reaches tropical temperature and brings many of the parasitic diseases upon us. A signed copy will be priceless. On the case, I believe this young man is suffering from hat infection from the protozoan Trypanosoma brucei rhodesiense. He's in East Africa and recently visited game parks whose animals can serve as reservoirs. His rather rapid onset of somnolence indicates an early spread to the CNS. The extra-erythrocytic thing in his blood smear is likely a long, squiggly organism with an undulating membrane, a central nucleus, and a small kinetoplast, a trypomastigote. I presume he will recall a painful bite and a chancre somewhere on his body a few weeks earlier from the bite of a tsetse. The CDC and WHO now recommend fexinidazole as a first line for both early and CNS stage T. brucei rhodesiense infection. Suramine, which used to be used in the early stages, and the toxic melarsoprol in the late CNS stage are now only used for those under the age of 6. Maybe Daniel can comment on whether fexinidazole is readily available and affordable in areas of need. Warmly, Kimona. I should maybe read that PS.
Yeah, you could read the PS.
Perhaps Daniel can bring along a signed PD7 to Panama in March, and I will make an extra donation above my sustainer contribution. I have recruited a group of my favorite colleagues to join me in their CME week at Floating Doctor, and even tried tempting Christina. Nudge, nudge. I feel nudged.
Daniel.
All right. Hazel writes, salutations, dear TWIPsters. I am writing from a snowy London, Ontario. For me, this episode's case diagnosis was between falciparum malaria and trypanosomiasis. Neither of the vectors for these parasites, the Anopheles mosquito and the tsetse fly, respectively, would be likely to be found at 1,800 meters in Arusha. Although with climate change, who knows how that might be shifting. But the patient's recent travel to parks at lower elevations would expose him to both. The most terribly specific symptoms could also be indicative of either malaria, or I would say not terribly specific symptoms could also be indicative of either malaria or trypanosomiasis. And extra-erythrocytic parasites could be found in either case. However, 1 week would be a bit short for malaria incubation. And Daniel's admission that there had been a painful insect bite tipped the scales over to trypanosomiasis. My diagnosis would be African sleeping sickness, most likely caused by Trypanosoma brucei rhodesiense. According to my PDF copy of PD7, treatment in early stages would be with IV Sermon. Thanks once again for all you do. Now more than ever, we need people like you fighting the good fight for science and education.
Jason writes, in TWiP 251 Sub-Saharan somnolence case, patient appears to present with acute stage disease caused by T. brucei rhodesiense. This flagellated parasite causes East African trypanosomiasis. The East African species exists mainly in eastern Uganda, the eastern shores of Lake Tanganyika, and along the western shores of Lake Malawi. West of the African Rift Valley, the western species T. brucei gambiense predominates. Patient complaining of fever, malaise, headache, body ache, somnolence, recent history of insect bite should be screened for both malaria and trypanosomiasis. Presence of trypomastogotes in the blood provides confirmation of trypanosomiasis, more popularly known as African sleeping sickness, and the insect bite may now be referred to as a trypanosomal chancre. The offending insect in cases of African trypanosomiasis is the Glossinia genus tsetse fly. According to the WHO's 2024 guidelines, our adult patient is best treated with fexinidazole with a loading phase of 1,800 mg PO for 4 days, followed by maintenance 1,200 mg 6 days. For children at 6 and older or patients weighing 20 to 34 kilograms, fexinidazole is given at a reduced dose. Patients less than 6 should undergo lumbar puncture for a white blood cell count and presence of trypomastogotes in the CSF. Suramine or melarsoprol is then prescribed. Warm regards, Jason. Christina.
Pietro writes, hats off to you, dear TWiPers. Greetings from foggy Pavia, Italy. Thank you all for the amazing cases provided in your podcast. Apparently last time I didn't submit my guess on time, so I'm rushing trying to solve the case of the patient with fever and malaise from Tanzania. As suggested by the hint of a painful bite, I suspect a case of sleeping sickness or human African trypanosomiasis, HAT, caused by T. brucei rhodesiense, as we are in Tanzania, and transmitted by the painful bite of the tsetse fly of the Glossina species. As in this case, extra-erythrocytic, that's such a difficult word, trypanosomes can be seen on Giem-sustaining and provide a diagnosis. Although the symptoms reported are suggestive for the first stage of the disease, the patient's experiencing some kind of somnolence and CSF and CSF examination is necessary to rule neurological involvement. Treatment is stage-specific and consists of suramine for first-stage disease or melarsoprol for second-stage disease, assuming this is a case of TB rhodesiense. Hoping to make it on time and win a book. I really appreciated the insight joke about sleeping on it. I remember that.
All right. Justin writes, hello, wonderful host. For the case of the sleepy 28-year-old patient visiting the safari, my guess would be African sleeping sickness, Trypanosoma brucei, likely encountered a tsetse fly, which are more highly concentrated in wildlife preserves. I wonder if time of day of the first blood smear impacted the likelihood of detecting a parasite, as some parasites can only be detected in the time that the vector is active. In this case, the day. Otherwise, it was simply too early in the infection to detect. Treatment likely began immediately, as untreated, this illness is very often fatal. Thank you for another great episode and case. Still hoping to win a book one day. Yours, Justin.
Victoria writes, I'm a long-term listener to TWiP, new listener to TWiP. Love your podcasts. Based on the location and activities, I'm afraid that your patient has human African trypanosomiasis, aka sleeping sickness, which he has acquired via a tsetse fly bite. Specifically, he's infected with T. brucei rhodesiense, which WHO says is found in 13 countries of East and Southern Africa. I've done a small amount of travel in that region, and we were definitely warned about the tsetse fly, so sleeping sickness was my first thought. I hope his treatment goes well. The WHO fact sheet lists only 2 treatment, and they don't seem like a picnic: suramine or melarsoprol. Thanks for all the information you put out into the world. Christina.
Nathan writes, Dear TWiP team, greetings from chilly Montreal, where it is currently minus 21 C. Oh, that's freezing. It makes me shiver just thinking about it. I was late for the last TWiP case study, guess, hoping to win the book this time. This week's interesting case involves a 28-year-old man in Arusha, Tanzania, visiting one of its hospitals at an elevation of 1,800 meters. The patient comes from a well-off socioeconomic background and has visited game parks during the last 3 weeks, potentially at lower altitudes. He is experiencing fevers, malaise, severe headaches, generalized body aches, and some somnolence, with symptoms appearing 1 week before admission. After conducting several blood smears, malaria was ruled out, and something extra-erythrocytic was observed. I guess that the patient is infected with Trypanosoma brucei rhodesiense, a common pathogen found in East African game parks. It is known for its rapid progression from infection to disease, and if left untreated, CNS involvement occurs within 3 to 4 weeks after infection. Treatment for the early hemolymphatic stage of East African sleeping sickness is suramine, which is effective only in the early stage due to its inability to cross the blood-brain barrier. TWiP has become my favorite podcast, and I listen to it every day while going to campus. Besides keeping up with the latest episodes, I'm also catching up on older ones. I have reached episode 149, Stranger in a Strange Land. P.S. I have noticed that courses on parasitic diseases are quite limited in healthcare programs. I truly appreciate your efforts in providing free resources that make this important knowledge accessible to everyone. Whenever possible, I try to share this podcast with peers and professors in my program. Best regards. And Nathan is a pharmacy student at Montreal.
Daniel.
Matthew writes, hello, TWiP hosts. I really enjoy the show. First-time emailer, long-time listener. I used to TA human parasitology at OU, Boomer Sooner, during grad school. This one came right to mind. My answer for the mystery case would be HAT, or human African trypanosomiasis. This disease is also known as Africa sleeping sickness. In the case presented, it's likely caused by Trypanosoma brucei rhodesiense, based on the location of the patient. The 2 major points that brought me to this conclusion were, first, the extra-erythrocytic parasite, and second, the high likelihood of a recent history of a painful insect bite. The patient is likely in the first stage based on the presented symptoms. Thanks. Looking forward to hearing the answer soon. Best, Matt.
Henrik writes, Dear host, thank you again for your podcast. I am glad I finally got a guess right, but somehow I did not make it in the show. Now I try to be early. Staying in East Africa near wild animals could be a hint to African trypanosomiasis caused by T. brucei gambiense and rhodensiense. Trypanosomes show in extra-erythrocytic flagellated organisms. The primary effect would be the trypanosomic chancre. It's funny that the treponema looks similar and also makes chancres, but are completely different from the protozoa. As we are in East Africa and the onset was rather fast, I would assume an infection with the subtype rhodensiense. Is everybody spelling this properly? Rhodensiense. Isn't there an N in there?
No, I think it is Rhodesiense because it was
Rhodesiense.
Yeah, I think it was Rhodesia, the country.
Rhodesiense.
Yeah.
We actually have, that was one of the things about the last version of parasitic diseases. In the back, we have a whole pronunciation guide.
Yeah, that's right. Rhodesiense. That's correct. It just didn't feel right. Wearing dark blue could have attracted the vector, the tsetse fly. As far as I understood it, repellents do not work against the fly as it's mainly is directed by sight and not smell. To be honest, I was quite overwhelmed by the former matrix, east, west, and CNS symptoms, none. And I'm quite happy that DNDi and the Gates Foundation and many others have established fexinidazole, which, to my knowledge, can be used for both subtypes regardless of infection stage. Thank you, Henrik. All right, Christina.
John writes, seeking to win the book. African trypanosomiasis or sleeping sickness comes in two distinct diseases, TB gambiense and TB rhodesiense. And because of differences in treatment, it is important to distinguish, but regionally, these fall east and west with different animal reservoirs, which I will get to. The textbook suggests that ruling out syphilis, leishmaniasis, and malaria, and we are given that blood smear returned negative malaria and another blood smear returned something erythrocytic, which pointed me to trypanosomiasis. While I wasn't able to find elevation impacts on the tsetse fly vector other than temperature range as a factor, I imagine it must be cooler and a different environment that makes it rare occurrence in Arusha. But the patient's recent visit of game parks are known dwelling of the animals that carry the East African TB rhodesiense, and the insect bite, fevers, malaise, bad headaches, body aches, and somnolence are all correlated with this disease. The rest of the family not getting sick can make sense with this diagnosis since they may not have gotten bit, or the textbook suggests that some tolerance can occur with locals since out-of-country visitors tend to have a rougher experience with it. Incubation of TB rhodesiense is 2 to 3 weeks and can swell the posterior cervical nodes as a sign. Winterbottom sign. Blood smear, lymph node aspirates, and CSF can be used for diagnosis, and it looks like blood smear was enough here. So with the timing, it sounds like this is early stage. Treatment with suramine needs a test dose because it is associated with hypersensitivity for the early hemolymphatic stage, but does not cross the blood-brain barrier. So it is only effective in early stage. Late or encephalitic stage has one treatment, melarsoprol, but it didn't sound like it was necessary here. That's good because it is associated with encephalopathy in 3% of cases. I took Dr. Griffin's advice and slept on it, but this was my first instinct and I'm sticking to it. Cheers.
Rod writes, hi all at TWiP. I am a retired science teacher and studied parasitology as an undergraduate and entomology as an undergraduate and postgraduate in London. Having slept on it, my educated guess is that the 28-year-old that had visited Tanzania has acquired trypanosomiasis transmitted by a bite from a tsetse fly, Glossina species, most likely while visiting areas inhabited by large herbivores, which are a reservoir for these parasites, specifically Trypanosoma brucei rhodesiense, the East African subspecies. If only suffering from the early stage, he could be treated with pentamidine. I was fortunate enough to visit Ngoro Crater many years ago. Beautiful spot, thriving with wildlife, both large and small. Thanks again, Rod.
Courtney writes, hi, everyone. tricky case on our hands this week. Lots of details to sort through to make a correct diagnosis. For this one, this came down to geography, the quick onset of symptoms, including somnolence and the memory of a painful insect bite. With that, my guess is the man has African sleeping sickness or trypanosomiasis caused by the parasite Trypanosoma brucei rhodesiense. Thanks. See you next episode. Christina.
Ben writes, hello all, sleeping sickness, African trypanosomiasis. Consult Dr. Barrett for the latest drugs. TWiP 238. Actually, he's just had a review published on that as well. Call the game reserves and suggest they go kill the tsetse to protect the next person and their own animals. Tsetse, unlike nearly all other insects, can be eliminated with traps. Thank you. Ben in Liverpool, who is a returning champion.
Really? Go kill all the tsetse? Is that feasible, Daniel?
So it's not feasible to kill them all. Let's circle back to that at the end because I've
taken a note. So
I've got several sort of notes.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, things we're going to circle back to. Okay, Half Thor writes, greetings from Atlanta, longtime listener of the Twix podcast since well before COVID. I'm not in the medical field, but parasitology and virology fascinate me to the point where I had to buy the Principles of Virology 4th edition set when I found them used. I also bought the very inexpensive electronic copy of Parasitic Diseases on Amazon, but it doesn't work on Kindle, and it just doesn't feel as good to read as a real book. Hint, hint. After listening to TWiP 251, I opened up PD7, did a search for Tanzania. At first, I was a little worried because there were quite a few matches, but the first one on page 57 seemed like the right diagnosis. African trypanosomiasis, or sleeping sickness, caused by the painful bite of the tsetse fly, transmit the Trypanosoma brucei gambiense, or more likely in this case, TB rhodesiense, protozoan parasite, which is game animals as its reservoir. A nice differential diagnosis, syphilis, malaria, which was excluded. Our most recent pick, leishmaniasis. Treatment depends on the clinical stage. Well, that's my layperson non-chat GPT diagnosis. I watched the Relevant House episode, season 1, episode 7, Fidelity, which featured a sexually transmitted case of HAT.
Your wife has human African trypanosomiasis.
According to the WHO, this has only been reported once.
Wow.
All right. I should read the PS. You should remind people to check with their employer to see if they can do donation matching. My employer uses Benevity donation matching platform, and we now have Microbe TV registered and eligible to match.
Very nice. By the way, he writes, attached you will find evidence of my longstanding interest in virology. He has a 2014 certificate from taking my online Coursera virology course.
That's great.
Good job, Half Thor. All right. Karen writes, East African trypanosomiasis, ? Well, that's not much of a guess, is it? With a question mark after, you have to be more definitive. I will take the next one. James writes, bite of tsetse fly, trypanosomiasis. Most likely he was bit while visiting Tarangire Park. That's the park with the highest number of tsetse flies. Tanapa actually puts up blue impregnated sheets in the bush so animals can get some protection from the flies and therefore decrease the risk of humans being bitten. The bite is a little painful, and like a deer fly bite here in the USA, the blue sheets have deltamethrin on them. Serengeti has some cases, but Tarangire worse. All right. Christina.
Jay writes, Dear TWiP, I learned at least 3 important lessons on the most recent episode. Lesson 1, get my TWiP guess in on time. Lesson 2, don't give a one-word answer, as I was tempted to do. I'll get to lesson 3 at the end. I suspect this 20-year-old gentleman who lives with his family at around 6,000 feet of elevation in Tanzania was bit by a tsetse fly when at lower elevation visiting game parks. He developed fevers and bad headaches within a couple of weeks of his return, and he was somnolent on exam. I suspect the extra-erythrocytic forms seen on blood smear were trypamastigotes from Trypanosoma brucei rhodesiense, one of the causes of human African trypanosomiasis. Since I need to keep lesson 1 in mind, get my guess in on time, I'll be brief. The WHO released a summary of treatments this month in The Lancet. I'm no expert in the treatment of HAT, but fexinidazole or melarsoprol might be the best treatment options. Consultations with healthcare providers well versed in HAT is needed urgently, and what it sounds like this gentleman got. It is what it sounds like this gentleman got. I hope he did well, and I look forward to hearing about it later this month. Lesson 3. I love the way you discussed the question of immunity to leishmania in the last episode. You approached it from a standpoint of wonder and curiosity, and that is what science and learning are all about. So lesson 3 is that all of you at TWiP are masters of cultivating that space of wonder and curiosity among yourselves and your listeners. Please keep it up. Thank you, Jay. And that was a nice one to end with.
All right. Well, not to end with, because we have 2 more people that get to guess, and then we will chat a little bit. So we're going to put you on the spot, Dr. Nalla. What do you think is going on?
Well, I think I have to be in agreement with all our listeners. The description was, it could be different things, but the description was just kind of the descriptions I might have heard in other cases presented. And I think the somnolent was a bit of a trigger, the insect bite, and also the cheeky sleep on it. That kind of nailed it for me. So I was a bit lazy. I didn't do a differential, but I guess, there'd be other things that could cause people to be somnolent, malaria particularly, if they maybe have severe malaria, which this gentleman did not. But yeah, I was a bit lazy.
Vincent, what are you thinking?
So I'm thinking African sleeping sickness, because the word somnolence, that was the key.
Okay.
The extra-erythrocytic forms, right? That's not that common from what I understand. Could be wrong. And then the painful bite. I think those things were what before I even read all the guesses. That was it.
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to actually see the slides, right, and see the extra-erythrocytic forms. And this is one where the diagnosis was, yes, sleeping sickness, East African sleeping sickness. And the interesting, a lot of sort of putting this together. So, right, the epidemiology, the acute onset, the fever in the returning traveler, right? Funny, returning traveler who lives in Tanzania, but returning to the higher altitude. Malaria was ruled out, repeated smears. It's interesting, right? They did not pick this up in the early smears, but by the time they repeated the smears after about a week, it was really teeming. There was so many of these trypomastigotes. They were just, it was beautiful, beautiful slide. And I think it raises a couple things. One is the very exciting advance in treatment, right? So this is the DNDi, which is this program where they really were saying we need new ways to treat this disease. And there's a nice brand new WHO guidelines for treating rhodesiense, human African trypanosomiasis, expanded indications for fexinidazole and pentamidine. This was just published in the Lancet Infectious Disease, and we'll be talking more about that on the ID Puscast. But yeah, you no longer have to do lumbar punctures in folks that are 6 years older with body weight of 20 kilograms or more. You basically just treat them with this fexinidazole. It's effective in the early and the late stage. It's oral. It's just a great move forward as far as treatment. A couple other things came up. Can you just get rid of all those darn tsetse flies?
Yeah, right. Can
you?
That's
That's the life cycle here, right? You get bit by the tsetse fly. That's how you get infected. Now, I have been taught that there was like one tsetse fly per square kilometer in East Africa. I find that hard to believe because I was just in Tanzania, right? And now I was going to say last month, but we're in February, so it was in December. And I was actually in these areas, and we would see multiple tsetse flies at the same time. Within the same, So, and what they do is they set up these traps, and the traps are actually usually a dark fabric. They're impregnated with this insecticide so that the tsetse flies will land and actually die on them. And it's interesting. So yes, as I think some of our emailers wrote in, the tsetse flies, I mean, they're basically mammals in my world, right? They get up there, they watch, they hunt by sight, they give live birth, they feed their young with this milk-like substance. So they're actually attracted to that dark blue, dark color, and then they end up dying when they land on this toxic surface. Christina, what are your? I see you have.
It's actually quite complicated with those Glossinas because it depends a bit which type they are. So the kind of savanna ones, they are also attracted by odors. So you can complement your traps with, I don't know, something that smells of cow, or I don't know, carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
But then the riverine Glossina that are predominantly transmitting the Gambiense form, so they are not so much. So they're more visual, and for them these little tiny targets have been developed, and I read that they're actually really amazing at accelerating the elimination of the disease. And I suppose there may be more than one square kilometer, but because they have this quite unusual way of reproducing, i.e. that they produce one pupa at a time, one larva at a time, and one about every 10 to 16 days. So the reproduction rate is really quite low. Quite interesting. Yeah. There used to be in my lab, there used to be a tsetse insectary. So sometimes you would see the little kind of pupae. They're quite beautiful. They look like little, I don't know, cartoon hand grenades. I don't really know how else to describe them, but that was a long, long time ago. So
what do you think of the sexually transmitted cases? How would that happen?
I'm trying to figure out how it would happen, right? Because so it's going to be in the blood.
Yeah.
And, just thinking about size, they're not much larger than a red blood cell. Would it somehow get in the semen, and then somehow it's got to get from the semen to another person? I remember hearing about this case.
It seems odd.
It does seem odd. Yeah,
it's probably unlikely, but there is a trypanosome species of horses that is transmitted sexually. I think it's Trypanosoma evansi. So not completely out there, but I don't think it's. It's not going to be very common, isn't it?
Well, I know what I'm going to do tonight. I'm going to go back, not only rewatch the House episode, but I got to reread that case report and try to figure out.
Yeah. There was something I wanted to pick up that, how one of the listeners said that they were wondering whether the blood parasite was seen in the day because the tsetse bite in the day. But I think that is more got something to do with that kind of the antigenic variation, and that, that the parasite builds up really rapidly in the blood. And that's when you see parasitemia, and then the immune system recognizes that particular variant, and the parasitemia decreases really, really quickly. And then it comes back up again when another antigenic variation develops. I think it's probably got more something to do with that. What do you think, Daniel?
Yeah, so there's definitely that cycle where you get a lot of parasitemia, and then you get the immune response, and then it goes down. There's there's a shift of the surface antigen, this whole kind of cassette genetically programmed, and then it rises again. So there's this cycle over time. You see a lot of that clearly with West African because it's much more of a chronic, where East African is much more aggressive, right? Weeks from going from the infection to death in a lot of cases, right? So that may have been part of it. They may have, when they looked the first time, there wasn't much parasitemia. Now there's the parasitemia. Maybe if you wait a day or two, and it might come back down again. So you have to kind of catch it. I haven't actually heard of African trypanosomiasis having a daytime variation the way some of the filarial, right? Some of the filarial infections have sort of that. You got to draw the blood at like 1 a.m. So.
And that's actually really interesting. Okay, it's not filarial episode today, but that depends on the geographic location a little bit as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even with the same filaria species. So really fascinating. And actually also, I think Rhodesiense reaches quite high parasitemias, whereas Gambiense, the parasitemias are generally much lower.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there's a bit of luck in there. We do have a really amazing speaker on our DTMH course who actually does an entire 2 hours of presenting cases of HAT. And, that's something that she often mentions, that actually also the blood needs to be processed really, really quickly and preferably on site because the parasites are also not stable. So maybe we could get her on as a guest one day. She'd be fascinating to talk to.
Yeah, we've talked about it. I don't know if we shared a paper on This Week in Parasitism, but this is a growing concern in the area of particularly East African sleeping sickness. Having expertise in this area, having clinicians that have even seen a case, that have treated cases. Very hard to be an expert when you've not seen or treated a case. And, you've read a few books, and that's what makes you an expert. So, yeah.
And I think that was the reason. I don't know if you remember, it was maybe December a year ago, we did some kind of things in the news or something that piqued our interest. And it was actually a recurrence of trypanosomiasis in Ethiopia. There were several cases. And the first, I think, 3 or 4 patients in that outbreak died because there was not that expertise. It was not suspected. And it wasn't diagnosed in a timely fashion. So I think that is really, really important that you do have those experts around, even if the disease is maybe reaching elimination status.
Yeah.
There was another question about tolerance. Sorry, just that last one that I wasn't too sure. It's not someone mentioned that there might be tolerance, and I'm not sure that is. I think it's invariably fatal, or that's at least what we are taught.
It's definitely what we're taught, but it does make you kind of wonder. Yeah,
it does.
Are there individuals, and there is some literature suggesting that there are some individuals who may have survived. This may not be uniformly fatal, right? Because we see the sick people. So what about the people that maybe got it and, maybe didn't die and then maybe developed some? But yeah, that is what we're taught. We're taught it's uniformly fatal, but I'm always willing to meet all knowledge with a bit of mystery, wonder, and humility.
That may well come from because we don't look. There isn't actually a good serological test for the East African sleeping sickness, so screening would be maybe not as straightforward.
Yeah.
Okay, time to give away a book. We had 22 eligible respondents, including Kimono. We'll keep you in there.
Okay. Do a drum roll.
Are you ready? Number is 3. That is 3, so all the way up at the top. Better be a good guess. This is, it's a good guess. Steve. Yeah, that's a very long guess. Steve from the Eastern Sierra. Steve, you are our book winner. So what you need to do is send your address, your physical address, to TWiP at microbe.tv and put in the subject line. That's an email. TWiP 253 book winner. And you seem to be here in the U.S., so we don't need your phone. And we will ship you an autographed copy as soon as we can. Congratulations. Christina, can you do a hero in like 10 minutes?
Yes, I can, particularly because we've already talked about half of it.
Okay.
So today I actually want to deviate a little bit from our normal hero segment and nominate Initiative as a hero. And that's the Drugs for Neglected Disease Control Initiative, or DNDi, which Daniel mentioned earlier. So this is a not-for-profit organization that develops essentially new treatments for neglected patients suffering from neglected diseases. And just to give you the headline really first, since 2003, DNDi has developed 13 treatments for 6 devastating diseases and has potentially saved millions of lives and probably averted quite a few dailies as well. So where did it start? So actually quite some time. So we need to go back to 1999 when Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, they were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of the organization's humanitarian work. And so we're not going to talk about MSF today. I want to talk about DNDi, but actually MSF plays an important role in the foundation of DNDi because it was partially enabled by the Nobel Peace Award. So in 2003, they teamed up with several other organizations, for example, the Indian Council of Medical Research, the Osvaldo Cruz Foundation in Brazil, the Kenyan Medical Research Institute, Malaysian Ministry of Health, and the Institut Pasteur in France, and also with the participation of the World Health Organization special program on research and training in tropical diseases. So they founded that initiative. So they have offices on 5 continents, and they work to ensure that people most affected by neglected diseases are part of medical research and development. So kind of they help setting priorities and treatment development and to strengthen capacity and, particularly deliver new treatments where they are needed most, because it's probably not very profitable for your generic pharmaceutical company to actually put the funds towards the development of a drug that may actually not make them all that much money. So their primary focus has been on development of drugs for the most neglected diseases like human African trypanosomiasis, visceral leishmaniasis, and Chagas disease, which of course our keen listeners know are parasitic diseases that still do pose a really great risk to public health in affected areas. They're not the only diseases that DNDi is actively developing treatment for. Other areas of interest include mycetoma, which is a mixed pathogen infection that causes severe disability, particularly in the lower extremities, the feet. Other portfolio infections include pediatric HIV, cryptococcal meningitis, and also onchocerciasis. And I think you should really explore their website. They do some really amazing work. And the reason why I chose DNDi is really because they have been really, I just lost the word there. So they have been actually driving the development of new drugs to treat African sleeping sickness. So this new drug that is now recommended both for TB gambiense and also TB rhodesiense since last year, that was actually pushed through development by DNDi. And we did actually talk about this drug. Can't remember which TWiP it was, 235. No, that's not 235. It is 2004, and then we actually discussed a clinical trial of that drug that was published in the Lancet. So this is the first all-oral treatment for both stages of TB gambiense and now also TB rhodesiense, sleeping sickness, with a few exceptions that some of our listeners has hinted to. And I've actually copied the new treatment recommendations in our show notes for anyone who's interested in it. So the drug was registered in the DRC in 2080 and in Uganda in 2021, and other endemic countries are using it through special authorization through their ministries of health. And it's also been added to the World Health Organization list of essential medicine for adults and children in 2019. But that is not, they didn't stop there at all. So DNDi didn't stop there, and in late 2009, there was another drug that was actually selected for development, is acoziborole, and this was selected as a preclinical candidate to treat sleeping sickness caused by TB gambiense. And in 2012, it became the first new chemical entity to enter clinical development from the DNDi's own lead optimization program. This is also an oral drug, a 1 day single dose. So that would obviously reduce hospitalization time, because fexinidazole still has to be given under hospital conditions over 10 days. So a clinical trial in 2023 indicated that is really highly efficacious and has a favorable safety profile. And I think it holds a lot of promise in the efforts to reach the WHO goal of interrupting HAT by 2030. And more clinical trials are underway, and maybe that's something we can talk about when they are published. So here we go. I really think, this is an initiative that we should support and celebrate. So 3 cheers for Drugs for Neglected Disease initiative.
Thank you, Christina. All right, Daniel, have you got a case for us?
I do. This is a case from a colleague of mine who will be on in a couple weeks to do the unveil. It's a colleague I worked with in Southeast Asia. Now, the patient is a 26-year-old woman with no past medical history, been healthy before. And this patient's actually from Georgia, United States, and she's volunteering in this town in north central Guinea, Hariko, Guinea. She arrived in Guinea in December 2023. So about a year ago. She was taking doxycycline for malaria prophylaxis. She said she never missed any doses. Now, October 2024, right? It's been there for, over almost a year. She develops fever, a dry cough. They do some lab work. They say, let's check the next day. Well, the next day she comes in, didn't sleep well, fever up to 104. The cough is continuing. The next day she goes to the hospital, actually ends up in the ER with this acute febrile illness of unclear etiology. When they see her, she doesn't have a fever at that time. Blood pressure's okay. Heart rate's in the 90s, or oxygen saturation's in the high 90s. Physical exams are unremarkable. So normal exam, head to toe. They say, we're not sure exactly what's going on. And they give her Augmentin and Coartem, right? So sort of broad spectrum. Let's treat for any kind of infection. Maybe there's malaria in there, despite the fact they haven't made that as a diagnosis. So sort of pause here, think about, your differential, what might be going on here in Africa.
So where is she? She's presenting in Guinea with these at a local hospital?
Yep, to the local hospital.
Okay. They know that she's been there for a while, I presume, right?
Yep, they know she's been there. So they get some blood work back. She's got an elevated white blood cell count. There's no anemia. Platelets are normal. There are some eosinophils they haven't cleared. Otherwise, blood work not too exciting. But they do a stool parasite exam, and they see some sort of eggs on the parasite exam. The malaria smear is negative. The chest X-ray shows the bilateral infiltrates. So based upon seeing these eggs in the stool, they decide we should treat her with some medication. So they give her a medication. She ends up vomiting about 30 minutes after that. And then they wait a number of hours, 5 hours later, they give her another dose of medication, she vomits again, and then they send her out. The following day, she comes back. She's like, I am much worse, actually. Her temperature goes up to 104 again. Now she's got watery diarrhea. She feels nauseated. She actually is now not vomiting. So they decide, let's give you another dose of that medication from yesterday. We'll give you some ibuprofen. We'll give you some IV antibiotics. She gets something called ceftriaxone. They start her on that every 12 hours. During the day, she continues to have low-grade fevers. She develops abdominal pain. That night, she again has a fever to 104. She remained admitted for 5 days. She's not doing well. Diarrhea, nighttime fevers, diffuse abdominal discomfort. They keep doing the malaria tests. They keep being negative. They've done blood cultures. They're negative. She continues to have this mild elevation of white blood cell count, and some of these like AST, ALT, so serum aminotransferases are slightly elevated. They finally decide, we're gonna send this woman to a different hospital. She goes to a different hospital. They say, you know what? We're not going to give you that other medicine. We're going to give you something else. They give her the first dose, and within 24 hours, symptoms resolve, and she feels all better.
My gosh.
So what's the diagnosis and what was going on with management here?
What, HIV negative?
HIV negative.
She lives alone in Guinea?
Yep. She's got her own place where she's staying there in Guinea.
What kind of a place? Is it a rural place with thatched roof, or is it regular?
No,
place?
it's a regular place.
Okay.
You know, it's hot, so there's like, you know, nice places nearby where you can go swimming and things like that. So it's sort of a nice setting.
Does she cook her own food, or what are her eating habits? Has she got a garden maybe? What was her sanitary situation?
We don't know. We don't know that much about that. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know anything about her food, huh? I guess she doesn't go to a restaurant, Christina.
It doesn't sound like there was anything particularly exciting about the diet. Sounds like just, you know, she's been there for a long time, right? So it's a mix of sometimes she's preparing stuff, sometimes she's going out to get stuff.
Yeah, okay. Doesn't have any painful bites, right?
No, there are no painful bites, but you know, she's in an area, right? So Guinea's, right? If you think about Africa, it's sort of all the way west, a little bit south, right? So Sub-Saharan Africa, it's hot.
Guinea, actually, just to go back to trypanosomiasis, has just eliminated trypanosomiasis as a public health problem. It's just been in the news recently.
That's cool.
Right. So we can rule that out.
Probably not sleeping sickness, but we never know. Well, do we have any information about the potential some sort of eggs?
We just know they're eggs. They were recognized as a particular type of eggs. Oh, yeah, we've seen these before. We know what to do, quote unquote. They start the treatment, and then we sort of heard what happened.
Okay. Okay, so some sort of eggs is not a hint that it might not actually be an egg.
No, they actually are. These are particular, you know, they recognize them. These are the eggs of a particular parasite that is endemic to that region. So they feel like they know what's going on.
Just checking, because sometimes you play with words.
Yeah, no, that was good. That was good. So these are actually recognized as a parasitic ova. Okay,
thank you, Daniel. We'll look forward to the reveal. Meanwhile, that's... You can find show notes at microbe.tv/TWiP. If you want to try guessing, TWiP at microbe.tv. Put TWiP 253 case in the email subject line. And if you enjoy our work, please support us. Microbe.tv/contribute. Daniel Griffin, Columbia University, Irving Medical Center, parasiteswithoutborders.com. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, thank you. And everyone, be safe.
Christina Nalla is at Glasgow University. Christina Nalla on Blue Sky. Thank you, Christina.
Well, thank you. I've learned a lot and I had a lot of fun. So what better thing could happen on a Friday evening?
Indeed. I'm Vincent Racaniello. You could find me at microbe.tv. I'd like to thank the American Society for Microbiology for their support of TWiP and Ronald Jenkins for the music. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon.
Another TWiP is parasitic.